Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I'm excited here today to talk about a topic that's a little bit more difficult for me to talk about because it's not my area of expertise, and that is around technology. And what is it that we need to have in terms of technology to be able to use generative AI? So I get a lot of questions from people. It's like, okay, how do we do this? How do we build our technology stack as an organization? And again, this varies from again, small companies, medium-sized companies, individual people like me, entrepreneurs, to very large organizations going, how do we think about this? So I wanted to go into a little bit more detail today about how do you think about generative AI? Because there are so many different options. There are the publicly available tools like uh, obviously ChatGPT, Midjourney for images, GitHub Copilot for checking code. We have Adobe. We'll talk about some of those services. And then increasingly, we're seeing companies also building their own internal resources to be able to leverage their internal data. So I'll share with you some of the examples of how companies are doing that. So I'm going to give you a whole spectrum of how to think about this. And what I'd love for you to share is, first of all, say hello, where you're coming from today, and then add what kind of generative AI technologies are you using or your organization is using on a regular basis? Are you using primarily the externally publicly available generative AI tools? And if so, how are you using them to protect your company's data? And then also, if you're exploring and trying to use these for leveraging your internal data, and how are you approaching that? So let's get into it. So I do have a short deck today. If you want to get those slides, you can get them here too as well. And I will put them into the chat. I think I can, some reason I'm not able to get in. It's not working today, my chat. So unfortunately, someone can take the URL in here and stick it into chat for me. That would be super helpful. Again, just my program here today is just not working the way I want it to be. So take a look at that. And one of the things that I think is super helpful is to just give a little bit of context. And so we have somebody coming here today from Wolverhampton. I can't see your name, unfortunately, but welcome. And Sanjay also, thank you for joining. Sanjay saying this is a very pertinent topic today. It's going to transform the way we do our jobs. I could not agree more. So let's get into that. So today I have a few slides. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. There are three general approaches to thinking about, and thank you, Javier, for posting that into the chat. Really appreciate that. So there are three general approaches to thinking about technology for your organization. The first one is, as I mentioned, to use the publicly available platforms. And these are extremely helpful because they're just there. They're already all set up and ready for you to use. And they're off the shelf solutions. Obviously, ChatGPT, easy to use, can do a lot of research, summarization. You can also upload documents if you are wanting to do that. But it's also, you can use things like GitHub Copilot, which is great for if you're generating code or checking code. Adobe Firefly is doing great in terms of generating images that you also have permissions to be able to use. Some controversy around whether they actually have permission to use those materials from their libraries. And if you're going to use these, then make sure that you are making sure that there's policies in place about what can you use in these publicly publicly available platforms, and also the training on how to use them responsibly and ethically. The key word here is democratizing the access to all of these tools. And the reason being, and this is a really important thing to stress, the key thing about these tools, if you're making them available in the organization versus just shutting them down and saying don't use them, it's good to make it available because people are otherwise just going to use them anyways because it's easily accessible. So you're much better off having policies in place about how to use them safely, and to give training across the board about how to use this. So, for example, on ChatGPT, one of the things you can do is to make sure that the searches, I'm sorry, the things that you generate, your chat history, are not saved. And so anything you put into there, you're trusting that it's not being used to train the model. It's not saved over time. And then you can feel a little better about putting some things in there without knowing that it's going to be put out into the public and shared with people in general. So knowing how to turn that off inside of your settings is a really important thing if you're working with proprietary content and information. So I keep mine off all the time to just make sure I'm not training the model with my own information. And the other thing is you need to be planning for the fact that these tools are going to be publicly available, widely available across the various platforms that we use every day. For example, I already have it access in my email client. I use Superhuman, and disclosure, I am an investor in the company. It's a great email client, super fast, and they also have now an AI tool that will help me just compose emails using my voice, using my past emails as a template. Office Copilot is coming where you'll be able to write documents, create spreadsheets, and do analysis around them. Have you ever tried writing a pivot table inside of Excel? It's it's complicated. And instead of having to know the mechanics, you can just put into text there, hey, I want to see what this looks like and create a table for me that does this. And also PowerPoint, being able to just use text to create slides. So the key thing here, and this is something that Sanjay had mentioned before, I think we also need to, regardless of anything more advanced than this, is to make sure we're thinking about how this is changing our jobs, how roles are going to change as people become much more productive. So working with your HR leadership, working with the workforce planning that you have, because I'm already talking to a lot of companies who are being very pragmatic, thinking about how to spread these tools out, make them widely available inside the organization. And they're planning on seeing anywhere from 25 to 50% productivity gains by the end of this year. And most of the leaders I'm speaking to are being very pragmatic and doing nothing more than using these publicly available tools, making sure that people understand how they can use them, when they should use them, and how to incorporate that back into their work. What you don't want is for somebody to put up company confidential information into publicly available platforms like ChatGPT, have it turned on for safe chat, and then pull something back out and put it out first draft without any editing at all. So that kind of training seems obvious, but it's not. And so making sure that people understand how to use these tools at the most basic level, really important. All right. So, and Sanjay is saying here that he's very excited because it can be a great productivity boost for PowerPoints and creating reports quickly. I absolutely love it because I can create the content very quickly. I can use some of my content already that I have stored. I can access that and be able to use that to create new documents is super helpful. And the way to do that is in many ways, let me open up the slide again. The second option, which is integrating your data, your proprietary internal data, your documents, the customer data that you have, financial information, deciding where and when you want to combine those things with some of these foundational models. So you're either bringing in these models inside into your company through APIs, or you're taking your data and taking it to them through services like AWS or through Azure from Microsoft. And some examples I have here are being able to connect multiple data sources inside of your organization. And so, for example, you could take internal documents and best practices, FAQ, support documents, and link them to your chat history, customer history to provide better support. I always love seeing that frequently asked questions on websites or that chatbots are attuned to go and answer. This approach allows you to answer the less frequently asked questions or the infrequently, very oddball situations that are buried inside some sort of document someplace that you may not have access to. But if you can put a foundational model of generative AI on top of your internal data, and it's all running inside of your company, then you have a fighting chance of being able to tap all of that knowledge and expertise and bring it up to your customer support team or directly to customers. Another example is you could take your customer relationship management tool, like Salesforce or HubSpot, and be able to connect that to your financial systems and have a full picture of what your customers and clients are doing with financial transactions, but also tie that to engagement. Historically, these two things are really separate, requires a lot of analysis and back end manipulating, but you could just tie these things all together to truly see your customers from a full perspective. And then if you're a healthcare system, you have a lot of patient data, but patients also have a lot of data that's collected on their phones, all on Fitbits. I have an Aura ring. And if I could connect that personal health data to my medical records, my doctor could get a much fuller picture, not seeing every single bit in pictures, but to see what the trend lines look like in terms of providing me better health advice. So, those are just three examples of how using these foundational models with private data or in systems, tying them together, really, I think, is the future for a lot of the tech, the AI tech stack that organizations are building. The third option is to build your own foundational model from scratch. And I'm just going to say, just don't do this. This is really out of the reach of almost every single company unless you're willing to put in the time and investment to build a model that is completely proprietary and geared and tuned to your data. Now, you may want to do this if you're dealing with, if you're a large healthcare system and you want to protect it, and there's a particular use case that the existing programs don't work with. So those are some of the options that you can think about. So I'm going to touch a little bit more into the second area, but I want to check messages to see if there's anything else here that I have. Okay, so far so good. Alok, thank you for joining. I'm glad you're finding this quite helpful. And I think, let's see, I think that's all what I have for now. All right, so I'm going to keep going and go on to the next slide, which gives you an idea what the tech stack actually looks like. I apologize, it's a little hard to read, but hopefully you can see it. So the first thing that I would say at the foundational level is your data sources. So thinking, let me just back up. One most important thing, and I'll talk about the process next, is if you know what are the most important use cases, then the key thing here is to know those use cases and then to build your tech stack based on those use cases. And one of the most important things is, where are you going to get the data from? Especially if you're going to pull it from these proprietary data sources. Where are they? How do you get access to them? I just put on a bunch of examples here. Your CRM, your financial systems, maybe in SAP or Oracle, your knowledge management systems, your SharePoint, your digital asset management, all your data warehouses in different places. How ready are they to be used to, again, which data sources do you want? What does that data look like? Understanding that. And again, these may be buried in legacy systems. So how are you going to get them out? Now, the good news is that a lot of these enterprise players are also building AI into their systems. So a lot of this tech stack will just be completely integrated right from the get-go. It's not, for the most part, there yet today, but I anticipate by the end of the year, a lot of the tools are going to be much better in terms of their integration into these existing enterprise tool sets. So that's why it's so important to be thinking now, which are the most important initiatives and the use cases where you would want to use generative AI? Where would it make the biggest difference? The next area is the data processing and analysis. This is when you're looking at your data, now that you know what it is, what kind of format is it in? Because these foundational models, these generative AI models, can't just take and ingest any type of data, especially if it's unstructured. It needs a little bit of structure in it. And also, it can be a lot more efficient if you can summarize the key points in a document, for example, into some key points, create a vector database against that to see how these ideas are related to each other inside the document and within documents, and then upload that into your foundational models. So cleaning, curating, summarizing them, providing context. So instead of thinking about this document as a standalone, how is it used? What other systems are you pulling in? When is it best applied to what circumstances? Anything that can put that document, that data into context of how it's best used against what situations and scenarios, the less work it's going to take and less expensive it's going to be to run these generative AI models. The third level is the actual generative AI model itself. The people are calling this the model hub because it's actually a lot of different foundational models that are in here. You have the foundational models themselves, the actual engines. You have prompts and training that you have put into this. You also have APIs and agents that can connect all of these data sources that may be inside the company, but also maybe external to you. And the agents are using things like LangChain or Lambda, Llama Index to be able to uh, make it a lot easier to connect all these different data sources and also provide that large language model, for example, a roadmap of where to go and look for the particular data it needs to complete a task. So lots of complexity in there. That's probably the most complex area in some ways, but it's also the area that's developing a lot faster because the platforms are all trying to make this as easy as possible to apply that into the enterprise. Next level up that is the quality, the feedback, because once you train the model, you want to continually train it to see, is it actually working? And then the applications that sit on top of the user interfaces. I think a lot of the enterprise application interfaces are going to go away, and you're just going to have a chat box that you can just put natural language into, and it'll understand what you're trying to do. So that's the AI tech stack. And I just want to go and see if there are any other comments here. Let's see. We have a question from Jay. How do you think LLMs can be used to differentiate between applied knowledge and novel research? Again, I think that's one of the key things on that data processing and analysis. It's looking at the knowledge that you have inside the organization, understanding the context of how it's being applied. And then if you have new research that's coming along, it'll be able to identify that. Now, the publicly available databases and LLMs that are out there will be able to actually understand that too, because the way it's being fed the information. So, Jay, I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly, but that's my understanding of how it is. Mahesh, my friend, good to see you. Excellent point. You can always use large models to train your model, not create them from scratch. Mahesh, I know, has had hands-on experience in doing this with a friend of ours, and it is really difficult to create something from scratch. And why would you do it? Because all of these foundational models now, for the most part, have APIs that you can use to go and pull that information into your private instance and be able to do that again against your data in the cloud or on premise. So that really helps a lot. Jay asked about Hadoop. Yep, it's in the mix too as well. Absolutely. It's all in here. I don't know Hadoop and all the technologies, which is why I feel like I'm hanging on fingernails here talking about this. But I think more than the most important thing here is to think about the stack and how you need to start thinking about pulling it all together. So let's see. We're going to go on. Oh, Sanjay has a point here. People have been using AI features for a long time, like Amazon, to track customer interest. Now there's awareness across geographic boundaries. It needs to train the model before trusting for an application. Yeah, absolutely, Sanjay. We're going to talk about trust in just a second, because I think trust is a really important thing in that you can't necessarily trust these models to know what they're doing. I just keep reinforcing to people, it is so early on right now. And all of these models have the generative part and they have a challenger part that is actually saying, hey, that doesn't make any sense. I know from these are the right answers and the keys that I have that this isn't right. So I'm going to train you on how to do this better. And then they have another party that's working with those two to see how they're doing and monitoring the whole thing, which is why, again, the monitoring section inside of your AI tech stack is extremely important. All right, I'm going to close out today. My time just flies with the last part here, which is what this process looks like. And I probably should have started with this now I think about it, but the key when you're thinking about the stack and how to approach it, don't approach it with the technology first. It is so important that you think about these other issues first. First of all, what are the use cases? What are the things you actually want to do with this generative AI? And you can go into use case hell because there are so many use cases out there. And the key here is to understand which are the most important ones that can create the most value or create the greatest competitive advantage for your organization. Make a list of those and then group them into similar categories because some of them are easy lifts that you can do right now with those publicly available tools that are available. So work on those and then know that the tool and the AI tech stack is going to get a lot better very, very quickly. So do the low hanging fruit first. And in particular, do the second bullet, work with your HR team and with your risk and legal team to identify all the policies, their training, and especially the upskilling that's going to be needed. I'll give you an example with coding. If you have coders who no longer have to write the most basic levels of code, they're going to have to upskill to a different level where they may be writing the code, but their ability to understand what is good code may not be as strong. So the people who are going to do really well are people who have a little bit level higher expertise, who can write really good prompts, understand what quality looks like, and be able to leverage that into higher level analysis and work. The most junior people will not necessarily have those tools. So being able to upskill them very quickly is going to be key. Another thing is to create a center of excellence, a community of practice, a cross-functional team that's going to be looking at generative AI from both a business perspective, looking at these priorities, but can also look at your existing infrastructure, look at your tech, look at your data, know how those things work. It is so important to connect both the technology and the business side, HR side, all these different groups that are going to be impacted, and get an understanding of how to use all of these tools to advance your business goals. I can't emphasize how important this is because if you leave it to just a technology team, they do not have the context of understanding the business use cases to be able to create the best possible platform. And the people in the business side don't have a good understanding of how the technology works to be able to be reasonable in terms of what they're asking for. Two last things is to make sure that your data architecture is updated in a way that you can easily start integrating with these generative AI models. There are already a lot of APIs that are written out there. It's amazingly simple how simple the OpenAI ChatGPT API is. It is just like, hey, this is the name of my data. This is how you can use it, and go for it. Go and use that if that's something you want to allow to be used. Using, again, LangChain and Llama Index are really good tools that are just making it a lot easier. They have a big, huge library of these APIs so that you can start building these connections and agents on your behalf. And then finally, make sure you have a process in place and reasonable budgets and timelines put together to develop these things. And then also to train them and very importantly, to maintain them. Because the data is changing, because the interactions are constantly changing, the training is going to change the level of quality, the responses that you get. So constantly maintaining your generative AI tech stack is going to be a really important part. So that's what I have for today. I'm going to go and see what else is here. Let's see. We have a question from Jay. You mentioned technology and business. What about the public commons? It's a great point, Jay. I love how you always bring up, okay, so how is the public good going to be served by this? That's a whole nother issue I'm going to talk about next week, which is really around how are we going to be thinking about the regulations? And I'll just put up here, how are regulators thinking about generative AI? So Jay, I'm looking forward to having some comments from you about how to think about this. But I want to do a quick dive into what the regulators are thinking about, and especially from the US, European, and Asia/China perspectives, and how they're taking very different approaches to thinking about regulation. Again, there's been some some activity recently where big platforms in the US sat down with the White House and agreed to certain activities and behaviors. They're not reinforceable by regulatory. So we're looking at the EU in particular for true regulatory procedures. But I think, Jay, to your point, how are we thinking about the public good? It is a continued issue because if jobs are being impacted, and if we're seeing also just disinformation coming about, the security risks about tying these technologies to a really important systems that we have. So I'll just give an example. What happens when we take a look at our air traffic control systems that are woefully out of date? And what a perfect example where you want to take real-time data and be able to put it into an engine and do what humans are now doing fairly manually to increase safety. But do you trust that system to do it better than humans do? And what happens if something goes wrong with that artificial intelligence? We're putting people's safety flying in the air. What is our way to out of that? How do we put the stop button on these things so that we can actually stop it? So lots of philosophical issues around how to protect the public good, what the public good looks like. I'll give you my 2 cents on this. We talk about ethical and responsible AI. It's not the AI, it's not the technology that's a problem, it's the people behind it. So we need to be thinking about ethical and responsible business and ethical and responsible leaders using this. So that's all for next week to give a precursor to that. But I do want to talk about just the AI tech stack again, that just remind you that it is a huge work in progress right now. If at the minimum, what you should be doing is thinking about how to use these publicly available tools, when to use them, how to use them, provide the training and access inside your organization in a thoughtful, responsible, intentional, and strategic way. And then start thinking about the use cases where you can bring it deeper into your organization and start using that data you have to create, again, just lots of different business use cases of how to leverage this, from customer service to customer experience, financial analysis, strategic planning. It goes on and on. There are so many use cases that are not limited by the technology, just only by our imagination. So that's what I have for this week. I look forward to continue the conversation. Please continue with your comments. I really appreciate them. I read everything. And also please get in touch if you have any ideas. I am working on this and researching for a new book. So if you have any particular case studies or ideas, I would love to hear from you. All right, take care. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Thanks. Bye-bye.